I've mentioned several times the importance of learning Torah and the impact that it has on our success in war, which really begs a larger question. If the impact is so significant, perhaps those who learn Torah should be exempt from fighting altogether, since their efforts are needed elsewhere. This is a topic that has not been discussed at length in the Gemara and in the Rishonim, most likely because it was just simply not relevant for almost 2,000 years. We either were not serving in any military, or we really weren't being asked how we felt about it. Nonetheless, from different places across the Gemara and the Rishonim, we're able to piece together a picture of what would the Torah perspective be on a Torah scholar serving in war. So first and foremost, it's important to mention that there is a lot of precedent, both in Tanakh and beyond, for Torah scholars serving in the army. It's clear in the battles of Yehoshua upon entering the land of Israel that Torah scholars fought, as well as the battles of David HaMelech, subsequently in Hanukkah, and even in the rebellion of Bar Kokhba, which was encouraged by Rabbi Akiva himself. If you look in the Gemara in Megillah, there's an angel who comes to Yehoshua to criticize him for not learning Torah at night, specifically at night, because they weren't fighting, and it seems to be implied from this Gemara that the Torah learners of the time were fighting during the day, and that was not an issue. It was only once they had time at night and didn't do so that the angel came to criticize their actions. That being said, the Gemara in Nedarim does criticize Avraham for taking Torah scholars out to war with him to go rescue Lot. There are those who like to build on that Gemara a broader approach to the issues with drafting Torah scholars. The issue, however, with using a source like that is that the war that Avraham fought is not a war that has Torah significance. Wars that have Torah significance, both on either on a mandatory level or a permissive level, are wars generally that have to do with conquering land in Eretz Yisrael, a war against Amalek, or a war for rescuing the Jewish people, or any Jew for that matter. What Avram was doing in the War of the Four Kings and the Five Kings did not meet any of that criteria. So perhaps you could say it's certainly not a priority for Torah scholars to go fight in wars that don't have to do with mitzvot or Eretz Yisrael. However, when we're talking about a war that the Torah is encouraging, that obviously would be a different scenario, or at least potentially would be a different scenario. Another Gemara that seems to speak about the topic is a Gemara in Sanhedrin, where Amasa is directed to draft people to war, and he doesn't do so because he sees that they had just begun learning, and the Gemara seems to say that he actually acted appropriately in that way. There are those like the Shut Yad Ephraim who learns from that Gemara that it's inappropriate to draft Torah scholars to war, but others point out that if you look at the context there, we're not talking about a Melchemet Mitzvah, a mandatory war. We're talking about a Melchemet Reshut, a war of permission, and that perhaps constitutes a significant difference when we would or would not draft a Torah scholar. That being said, that's kind of the background from the Gemaras that would give us an indication one way or another as to the topic. The person who discusses this topic in the greatest amount of clarity, at least in the generation of the Rishonim, is the Rambam. The Rambam says straight out as follows. Bnei Levi, so we're talking about Kohanim and Leviim, do not go to war like the rest of Klal Yisrael. Why? Their lives are dedicated for Avodat Hashem. They are basically the teachers of Klal Yisrael. They learn Torah. They serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu. They are removed from physical endeavors. They focus only on spiritual endeavors. For that reason, they do not go to war. That seems to be a pretty clear and straightforward approach to Torah scholars going to war, or Torah serving as an exemption, at the very least, for Bnei Levi from going to war. But the Rambam actually goes one step further in the next halacha, and he says it's not just for Bnei Levi. Bnei Levi are kind of born into this program, but anyone who wants to choose to live the Bnei Levi lifestyle can be a honorary Bnei Levi. Learn Torah, focus only on Avodat Hashem, and not serve in war. The Rambam says this in no uncertain terms, and that constitutes perhaps the clearest source in the Rishonim on the topic. However, this Rambam is not without difficulty. The Rambam writes these halachas in his sefer discussing the laws of Shemitah and Yovel, which is curious in and of itself why this is the place that he discusses this broad exemption from military service, not just for Bnei Levi, but seemingly for full-time Torah scholars as well. The issue is that the Rambam has a sefer where he delineates all of the laws of war, and that's in Hilchot Melachim. The Rambam there in Hilchot Melachim discusses at length the laws for war, including those who are obligated and exempt from war. The Rambam gives multiple lists. He gives a list of those who are exempt specifically from wars of permission and not mandatory wars. He also gives a list of those who are exempt from all wars, including mandatory wars. On neither of these lists does the Rambam mention Torah scholars, nor does he mention Bnei Levi. So, it's curious, why would the Rambam, in discussing Hilchot Shemitah v'Yovel, say that Bnei Levi, and by extension full-time Torah scholars, are exempt, but when he actually discusses exemptions from the army, from military, from war, he doesn't mention either one of them, not in the exemptions from Milchemet Mitzvah, and not in the exemptions from a Milchemet Reshut. To make matters more complicated, the Rambam in Hilchot Melachim seems to imply the opposite. Not only does he not include them in the exemption, he seems to imply straight out that Kohanim and Leviim are participating in battle. How does he do that? In his list of exemptions from a Milchemet Reshut, from a permissive battle, so not one that we have to fight, but one that we are allowed to fight, the Rambam discusses the details of those who are exempt because they got married in the last year. The Rambam there says, someone who got married, someone who had a marriage, which was not a halachically appropriate marriage. What's not a halachically appropriate marriage? He gives the examples of a Kohen Gadol, who marries a widow, or a normal Kohen who marries a divorcee, right? If you're in your Shana Rishona, your first year of marriage, from this type of marriage, says the Rambam, you are not exempt from war. You do not get to go home from war, rather you have to battle. The Rambam seems to say straight out that Kohanim are participating in the war and do not have an exemption from the war if they got married to someone that they weren't supposed to marry. So all of this serves to create some sort of doubt in terms of what exactly the Rambam is talking about in Hilchot Shemitah v'Yovel as far as the exemptions for Torah scholars and Kohanim and Leviim go. To understand this topic a little bit better, we need to do two things. One will be the duration of this video, and the second will be in the next video. First, I want to see, even if the Rambam does clearly hold an exemption for Bnei Levi and by extension Torah scholars, is he the only one who holds this exemption? Or is this let's say, an agreed upon idea that Kohanim, Leviim, and perhaps by extension Torah scholars would be exempt because of their engagements in Avodat Hashem? That's number one. Is the Rambam the only one who thinks this? Or is this a common idea? And second of all, does the Rambam even think this, given the apparently contradictory notions that he conveys in different places in his halachic works? So, in order to understand whether or not others are of the opinion that Torah learning and teaching serve as an exemption for going to the army, at the very least for Kohanim and Leviim. So here we can see in Parshat Bamidbar that Moshe Rabbeinu was commanded to take a census of the people, but not a census of the Bnei Levi, right? He's supposed to count everyone else, but not Bnei Levi. Now, that census was for army purposes, and he doesn't count the Bnei Levi. He does count the Bnei Levi later on to know how many people they have serving in the Mishkan. You can perhaps infer from there that the Bnei Levi were not serving in the army. But where this notion is discussed more clearly is around the psukim in Parshat Matot. So in Parshat Matot, God is sending out an army convoy to fight against Midian. There, the Torah says that they're supposed to send 1,000 from each shevet. 1,000 from each shevet for a total of 12,000 shvatim. This, of course, does seem to imply that Leviim were participating if 12,000 soldiers were sent out collectively from each shevet. That means 12 shvatim, and therefore Levi was involved. You could, however, say that Menashe and Ephraim were counted as 2 and Levi were excluded. That being said, the Sifri in Parshat Matot says explicitly on the pasuk beforehand, what does it mean, elef lemate, lechol matot Yisrael? Why does the Torah have to emphasize every shevet? Just say each shevet goes out. What is every shevet? Says the Sifri, to include shevet Levi. Now, there are those who learn from that Sifri, see, even Bnei Levi fight. But there are those, like the Yad Ephraim, who prove the exact opposite. That from the fact that the Torah needs to include here that Shevet Levi does fight, it's because everywhere else they don't fight. Otherwise, you would have just assumed that they'd be a part of it. But rather, the assumption must be that they don't participate in the fighting if the Torah needs to go out of its way to say, oh, here's a special battle where Shevet Levi are actually participating in. The Gur Aryeh takes it one step further and says from the fact that it says every single Shevet and also tells me 12,000, that the 12,000 doesn't even include Shevet Levi. The 12,000 would include Ephraim and Menashe, and the Shevet Levi was actually the 13th thousand, and they didn't participate in the battle at all. They were just supposed to come along with them, carrying the Aron as the spiritual koach behind the battle, but they didn't even fight in Midian. Now, there are a couple problems with that conclusion from the pasuk. Potential problems. The first of those problems is that assuming that the Torah mentions Bnei Levi specifically, because everywhere else they don't fight, so we're going to tell you here they do fight, is not the assumption that everyone makes. In fact, the Mizrahi, commenting on Rashi, says that no, the assumption is because they don't get an inheritance in Eretz Yisrael, you'd think they wouldn't fight. Therefore, we're teaching you here that even though they don't get an inheritance, they still have to fight. So the assumption that the Yad Ephraim makes of, in general, they don't fight, that's why we're telling you here that they do fight, is an erroneous assumption. In fact, we're teaching you here, we know you think they wouldn't fight because they don't inherit the land, but actually they do fight. Always. Furthermore, another issue is, if you want to prove that the Torah has to include here Shevet Levi because normally they don't fight, that works very nicely with one version of this midrash. However, the Vilna Gaon has a different version of the midrash altogether. Not lahavi et Leviim, not that it says kol to include the Leviim, but it says kol lehotzi et Leviim, to tell you here that they do not fight in this battle, but they would fight in normal battles. So you would do the exact opposite inference. If you said that you had to include the Leviim here, because normally they don't, well, if the Midrash is actually excluding the Leviim here, that would mean, according to the Vilna Gaon, that in general they do. So we can see the arguments on both sides, based on the Psukim in Matot and the Midrash there, how to understand the relevance for the Kohanim in battle. Now, this question came up practically around World War I, when there were Kohanim in England who were claiming that they could not fight in the British army because their religion prohibited it. Now, it was brought to the chief rabbi of England, who said that this is actually not true, and that Kohanim do fight, they do serve in armies, and it's not true historically that the Kohanim did not fight in war. Look no further than Hanukkah, for example, which was entirely fought by Kohanim. But more than that, a proof was brought for this argument based on the Mordechai in Masechet Gittin. See, the Gemara in Masechet Kiddushin asks the following question. We know there's a unique halacha called Eshet Ifat Toar, where a situation where normally a man would not be able to sleep with a specific woman for whatever reason, they aren't married and she's perhaps not Jewish, in the context of war, there is a one-time permission. That's called the laws of Eshet Ifat Toar. The Gemara there asks, was that permitted for everyone, even Kohanim, or was it only permitted for the rest of Klal Yisrael? And the difference is the rest of Klal Yisrael have one reason why they can't sleep with this woman, but Kohanim seemingly have two reasons why they can't sleep with this woman, as they are prohibited to even converts. So there the Gemara says that no, Kohanim are allowed to be with an Eshet Yifat Toar. The Mordechai in Masechet Gittin mentions this as a clear proof that Kohanim participated in war. Otherwise, the whole question is irrelevant. If they weren't soldiers, they obviously would not be able to sleep with an Eshet Yifat Toar. By the way, the Rambam himself quotes this halacha that Kohanim are allowed to be with an Eshet Yifat Toar, only further complicating our picture of how exactly to resolve the Rambam. So in the next video, we'll try to resolve the Rambam's complicated shita, but from this video, we saw multiple different approaches based on Bamidbar, based on Matot, and based on various Gemaras, as to whether or not Kohanim were drafted. Practically speaking, there is no clear precedent to exempt Kohanim and Leviim for the reasons that they are learning Torah. And in fact, this was the Psak Halacha in England before World War I, and the Psak Halacha as well that Rav Shechter Shlita gives to his students in YU as it pertains to serving in the military. Tomorrow we'll go into the different reconciliations as to what exactly is the Rambam's shita, since he seems to say very different things in different places.